Okay, thank you everybody. We're in the beautiful venue of Fiuggi for the DeepCon 19, and we have our guest of honor, Charlie Stross, and I'm going to ask him some questions. So, first of all, very glad to meet you.
Likewise.
And, you have 30 years of career in writing science fiction, around that.
Yeah.
And how did the genre develop over the latest decades? And is there any particular aspect that interested you the most?
That's not a small question.
Oh, no, it is not.
Yeah, the genre has changed considerably over the past 30 years. I don't think you can really consider science fiction in isolation without considering its interaction with other genres. A huge influence has been the explosion in science fiction and fantasy in cinema and on television in the past 15 years, as special effects have become cheap enough that they can do justice to the field. This in turn has fed into the writing of an awful lot of younger writers who, it's a cliche to say they've grown up with Star Wars, but that's very much what has actually happened, and it shaped their vision of how, for example, specific areas such as space opera should look. Meanwhile, we have a changing population as well. The older authors have retired or died, people like Arthur C. Clarke or Isaac Asimov, for example, or Robert Heinlein. New, younger authors are coming along the whole time. I'm over 50, I feel old and slow these days. There is much more visibility of women and people of colour in the field, and this is a good thing. More voices and more diversity. Yeah. At the same time, when we write science fiction about the future, we cannot help but be influenced by the world we're living in. So another of the things that's had a huge effect on science fiction in the past decade and a half, I think, has been 9/11 and the subsequent war on terror. Before that, 1989 to 91, and the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union, which had interesting effects. Actually, received wisdom from my publishers is that in 1990, they had huge numbers of books predicting a Third World War between the United States and the Soviet Union on inventory that kept trickling out for years afterwards, and sales were tanking. More recently, apparently an awful lot of people have been rewriting books since the election of Donald Trump. I can't think why. It's not as if science fiction writers like John Brunner weren't predicting the election of an insane kleptocrat as US president for decades before, but hey, that's where we've got to now.
All right. So from the concept of singularity to work automation to nanotechnology and cybersecurity, it seems like the latest developments in technology represent more a threat to humanity than a possibility of freedom. What scares you the most? And what hopes do you have for the coming post and transhuman society?
Firstly, I don't really hold with transhumanism much these days. Secondly, what scares me the most is stupidity. Also, our inability collectively to filter out false news, bad information. We're very, very gullible overall. I am as well as everybody else. I'm not claiming to be infallible or anything like that. But the way we can be spun, the prevalence of social media has resulted in huge amounts of data about all of us becoming available online. Your likes and repostings on Facebook and Twitter allow corporations with access to these systems to build up interesting profiles of you and work out what interests you, and more importantly, what you are likely to believe because you want to believe it. What was the old slogan from around the X-Files? I want to believe.
Yes.
That is our biggest weakness as a species. We're not skeptical enough. And at the same time, with the internet, as SF critic Damien Walters commented, it's as if in 2012 the human species developed telepathy. And unfortunately, we're all stewing in the filth that spilled out of our collective unconscious.
All right. In many of your books, you've often described future societies and economies. What's the role of speculative fiction and future studies in regard to these disciplines? Do you think that fiction and non-fiction could work together to shape the mind of experts and writers?
That's actually an entire commercial field of endeavour called futurism. It used to be futurology. And one of the aspects of it is spinning plausible stories to illustrate scenarios which are usually extrapolated on the basis of, if this goes on, what will happen if, for example, we try to remain on petrochemical fuels for the indefinite future, or if we get more efficient batteries and transition to renewables and solar power. If you're running a think tank and want to inject some context into policy making at large corporations, you might hire some futurists and possibly SF writers as well to come in and write some short stories illustrating what a day in the life might look like within the parameters that you've generated. That's not so much what I do, though. As a very eminent computer scientist, Edgar Dijkstra, once wrote, computer science is no more about building faster computers than astronomy is about building bigger telescopes. And you can argue the same about science fiction. Science fiction is no more about predicting the future than computer science is about building faster computers.
Yep. Okay. Excellent.
Going a little bit further, I'd say that science fiction is fiction, first and foremost. Fiction is the exploration of the human condition through telling plausible lies about ourselves. Science fiction tries to broaden the frame by telling plausible lies about ways of living that have never existed, but that may be conceivably plausible in the future or in other contexts by means of scientific or technological breakthroughs. And it's about the human element. If there are no humans in it, it becomes very hard to write fiction. I know this, I've tried.
Yeah. Okay. What about blockchain and open source technology? Do you think that they will play a significant role in the future?
Open source technology is everywhere. It actually won. If you are holding a mobile phone, 80% of them run Android. It is based on Linux, an open source operating system. As for blockchain is a very useful technology for people who don't trust each other. The people to whom cryptocurrency appeal tend towards crankish and mistrustful with a side order of conspiracy theories, and there's an awful lot of fraud going on in that field right now. Blockchain itself allows you to build distributed databases in the absence of trust. There are some places where this would be useful in infrastructure, but...
what about banks?
Banks are, by definition, meant to be trustworthy. You don't need distributed key signing, you just need a guaranteed key authority, a central bank. So no, I don't think it's really necessary at all. And I believe Bitcoin specifically was designed by an ideological right-winger with an axe to grind against the banking system as a whole. A modern-day inheritor of the sort of gold bugs who believe that the only good money is made of bricks of gold. This is actually crank territory, and not very nice either.
All right, then my latest question is what you're working on and what are your future projects?
Right now, I am trying to finish a final draft of Invisible Sun, which is the third book of the Empire Games trilogy, which is set in my Merchant Prince's universe, but is a commentary on modern surveillance states and a lack of trust between the governed and the governing. The next book in line behind that, I'm working on a space opera because, frankly, Brexit and Trump have soured me on writing alternate history or near future stuff. I want to write something set so far ahead they can't possibly break it. And finally, after that, nothing definite, but some years ago I wrote a couple of police procedurals set in the near future about crimes that don't exist yet. And I've been unable to write a third Scottish police procedural because Scottish politics went non-linear in 2012. However, once we get past March next year, we should know what shape of Brexit will be inflicted on us. I can go back to planning what Scotland might look like in a decade, and I can write the third Scottish crime novel.
All right.
And this one will feature zombies.
Oh my god.
And brain implants. And digital rights management.
Perfect. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Cheers.